everyone, and welcome back to ASP.NET Core 1.0. My name is Steve Bishop, and in this video we're going to be talking about assigning roles to our users. So in a previous video we were assigning the member role to any newly registered user. But what about our currently active users? What about the users we already have in the system? And what about roles that may not want to be added by default? We want to have some sort of administration mechanism to add roles manually to each one of our users. Well, in this video, that's what we're going to cover how to do. Is we're going to create a page to administer adding user roles to our different users. And this is going to take some of the different things that we've already learned up to this point and start to combine them together to help us build this page. So let's go ahead and hop into our Visual Studio window and let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my controllers, and I'm going to add a new controller here to manage all of this. I'm going to do new item, MVC controller class, and I'm going to call this our user management controller. Now for our index action of our user management controller, I want to display a list of users. So to do that, I'm going to need to get the database context into our class. And I'm going to go ahead and use some dependency injection to do that. So I'm going to open up our constructor, create our constructor, I should say, and we're going to say as a parameter contoso context, and just bring in the using statement for that. We're going to call this db context and assign it a local variable here called underscore db context, which I haven't created yet. I'll create that in just a moment. And we'll see that we could just use IntelliSense here by hitting control period, and we're going to say generate read-only fields for that underscore db context. Now I can go down here to my index action, and we can use that db context to get our users. So we'll do db context, and we're looking for all of our users. Okay, now I might be tempted to just do something like a toList like this, because I like lists. They're easier to work with. Because the user is really just this user's property is a DB set, and I don't like working with DB sets in my controllers. I'd rather deal with them as lists. Now that alone is not really quite good enough, because if you think about it, this information could be pretty much unordered, right? It could show up in any order that it might have come back from the database as. So we might want to do some ordering of this list for ourselves. To do that, on the users collection, I'm going to call order by. And this is a link expression that allows us to order the items by a particular property of that list item. So I'm going to say I need to pass in a link expression, which is a func or just a lambda expression works. So I'm going to say where user and the property I want to order by is email. Okay, so we're going to order our users by their email address, and that's going to be alphabetical. Now you may be wondering, why not order by their first or last name, something like that? Well, if we look at our database and go to our ASP.NET users table and take a look in here, we'll see that for our columns, we don't have a first name or last name. We've got access failed, count, birth date, concurrency stamps, emails, email confirmed, favorite toy, on and on and on, but there's no first or last name for the user. We have a username, we have an email, and that sort of thing. But we also have this birth date and this favorite toy. And if you recall, that came from back here when we created our application user, we added a birth date and a favorite toy. So if we wanted to keep track of the first and last name of our users, we could just simply put them on here. So we do prop string first name, and then we could do the same thing for the last name. Now from there, we would need to add a migration in our package manager console, and really that's just too much for this demo. I don't really want to do that. You guys can feel free to go ahead and do that if you'd like, but for me and for the demonstration, I think just ordering by their email is going to be fine for right now. So now that I have the list of users, I could just say, pass that user's model into our index view and just use the list of viewers. a list of users. But if you've watched any of my previous videos on this, I much prefer having some sort of view model, okay, and set the values that we require for this view to operate, put those values inside the properties of a view model. It's just a much better practice to do. So to do this, I'm going to go to my view models folder, and let's go ahead and add a new class. And once again, the typical way that I name this by convention is the name of the controller, so user management controller, and then the name of the action, which is index, and then just view model. Now on this view model, what do I need for it? Well, I want to put this list of users, which is list of application user. So we'll do prop list of application user. We'll just bring in the using statement here. So using Contoso models, and I'm going to call this users with a capital U. We'll just clean this up a little bit by removing and sorting, because I like to, make my classes look nice and clean. And let's go ahead and save that. Now I can define my VM variable here as a new instance of user management index view model. Hit Control period to bring in the models, or the view models, I should say. And there we go. So we've defined our view model. Now we can go to the view model users property and assign it the users that we grabbed from up above. So what we have here. Now, to be honest with you, yeah, that works, but I prefer a much more terse syntax than this, something a little bit shorter than that. So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to say define my view model, and I'm going to set up some initial values here. I'm going to say the users property is assigned what I have right here. So I'm going to take that out of there, put that there, get rid of these two lines, and we've kind of saved ourselves a little bit of typing. Nothing too big. It's still, basically the same number of lines. I could, of course, put this all on one line if I really wanted to, but that's not as easy to read when you kind of scroll over here. It kind of goes at the edge of the screen, so I do like to drop this down, but I still just prefer this syntax over doing it with the property assignments like that. Okay, so now we can go ahead and, for our view, include the view model and pass that along to our view. And speaking of which, let's go ahead and create that view. So I'm going to go to my views folder, and in my views folder, I need to, by convention, have a folder named the same name as the model, or I'm sorry, as the controller that is trying to look for the view. Okay, so I need to add a new folder. You guys pretty much already know all this stuff, I think, but it doesn't hurt to go back over it. So this folder is going to be called user management. And inside of here, I need to create a view, and the view name has to match what I'm doing here for the name of my action, because I'm just using the default version of view. I'm just calling view, and I'm not passing in the name of the view that I want to open. So by convention, MVC will look to the name of my action and try to find the name of the view based upon the name of the action. So let's go ahead and add a new item again. This time it's going to be an MVC view page. And index is the default name, and that's perfectly fine. That's what we're going to use. Now let's get rid of all this junk that comes by default, and let's declare our model. So we're going to do model, and we know that it's the Contoso RTM view models user management index view model. That is the declaration of our model. So that's what the model is that we're going to use inside this view. And now let's talk a little bit about how we're going to use this collection of users, this list of users. How do we use that? Well, what I want to do is I want to display each user as kind of like a format that you would see in an Excel spreadsheet or a table, like a database table, where you have rows and columns. And in HTML, if you want to display rows and columns in that way, one of the quickest ways to do that is to use a table tag. It looks like I can't spell table. There we go. Now on a table, I'm going to also add a T head to indicate the head of the table. And this is where our headings will go. And there's going to be one row inside of the head. So I'm going to use the TR tag, which indicates a new row. Now, on this row, I'm going to have 3 columns. And those more specifically are going to be column heads. So I'm going to use the TH tag. Now, the first column is going to be for email. The second column, again, this is going to help us with identifying the user and some information about each one of the users. So I'm going to say the roles that that user has. And then finally, I'm going to add another thing in here that is going to be called options. And we'll see what this is for in just a moment. Now I'm going to go down to our T-body. So create that tag there. I'm going to add a new T-row. And I'm going to need 3 TDs. So 3 columns, basically, for each row. Okay. One more. Now, I want to show one row with details here inside of each column, one row per user. And anytime that you want to iterate over a collection or over a list, that typically means you want to use the for each. Okay, so we're going to do a for each loop, and I'm going to say for each user in my model.users list, I'm going to do a new row. So I'm going to take this out here and put it inside of my for each loop. So now for each loop, for each user in my users, I'm going to add a new row to my table, and inside of each one of these columns in that row, the first one is going to be the email address of the user, so we'll do user email. The second thing is going to be the roles, and this is going to get a little tricky. We'll see in just a moment. You might think that this is all you have to do is just get the roles, but we're going to see that there's some problems with that in just a bit. And then finally, for options, what I want to do is, this is going to be an administration panel, right? This is a list where we're going to see a list of all the users, and then we're going to want to add a role to a particular user. So I'm going to add what will tantamount to a link called AdRoll. Okay, and now this link that I'm going to create is going to take us to another action in our application that will bring up a page that will allow the user to add a role or associate a role with a user. So to do this, I'm going to need to add the anchor tag. So we'll do A, and I'm going to use the tag helpers here for ASP controller. And the controller I'm going to use is just, let's just go ahead and use user management. That's fine. So we'll make an action inside of our user management. What will be the name of that action? Let's just go ahead and call it AdRoll. Okay. And now let's take the, it looks like we must have written over some stuff here, so we'll just put this back in here. It's going to be AdRoll. There we go. So AdRoll is the link text. It's going to take us to the AdRoll action on our user management controller. So, all right, we've got that set up so far. Let's go to our user management controller. And actually, you know what? Let's see this in action. Let's just see what this looks like and make sure that everything works. So we'll go to debug, start without debugging. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to our user management page. And there's some problems in there, isn't there? This whole list of user role string. But our link works. Oh, look at that. Okay, so the link would work, but it's going to take us to a 404, obviously, because we don't have anything there. But you might be looking at this going, boy, not only is that ugly, but also, like, this doesn't look very stylish. I'd like to see some better style to this, some kind of formatting to the way that the page looks. And you would be right. There's going to be some stuff that we're going to do later on in this series to deal with Bootstrap and formatting your pages. But for right now, just know that this is all that we're going to do for the demonstration. Again, like I said, later on, we'll add some Bootstrap to kind of make this page layout look a lot better. But this is a bit concerning here. This is something we're probably going to have to address. But at least we know that the page works, and we have a link here to add a role. All right, let's go ahead and go back to our page here, and I'm just going to close this window. And let's go to our user management controller, and let's add that action for adding roles. Okay, so we're going to do a public action result called AdRoll. And this is going to be a link that takes us to the AdRoll. That AdRoll action will need to display a page for the user to select a role and associate it with a particular user. Preferably the user that's been selected here when they clicked on the link for AdRoll. So in order for this to work, let's create a page that's going to be a form for adding the role. So I'm going to go back to my user management. I'm going to add a new item here. It's going to be an MVC view page. I'm going to call it AdRoll. Let's get rid of what's in here. And we could probably already tell, we know that there's going to need to be some sort of view model here. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's build that right now. So var VM equals, and this is going to be a new VM. So we'll go up to our view models, add new class. Okay, now this view model, I'm just going to use the naming convention again. So user management, add role view model. Okay. Now, what are some of the pieces of information the user is going to need in this add role? While we're at it here, model contoso rtm dot view models user management add role view model. Okay. Now, what are some of the things that this form is going to need to know? Oops. Let's get some. Oh no, that's fine. I could just do this myself. I don't need the snippet. I don't need the code snippet. I could do this all by myself. So we're going to do a ASP controller. So we need to know where the form is going to be posting to. I'd say the controller, once again, we're going to use the user management controller. The action that we're going to post to is the ASP action called, let's just do add role again. We'll just call the same action name as what we were originally calling back here for when we were doing our get, right? Because this is going to get us a page, going to call the AdRoll view, and we're just going to return back to another action called AdRoll. But the difference is this one here is going to be HTTP get, and we're going to add another one that's going to be an HTTP post version of the AdRoll. So public action results AdRoll. Now, typically what you want to do is, if you're going to post to an action, again with a similar name, anytime you're doing a post, you're actually posting and associating with the parameter through model binding. You're going to be passing back the same view model that was originally passed into the view. So this user management AdRoll view model is going to be the data type that gets model bound to. I'm just going to call this RV for result view, or RVM, result view model. Okay, so that's our result view model. We know it's going to be this view model back. That's going to contain the data. What is the pieces of information that we're going to need for this? We're just going to walk a little bit backwards. We're going to start from the end result. Where do we want to end up? And in order for us to add a role to a user, we're going to need to get the user manager. So we're going to do user manager, application user. Let's bring in the namespace here. Call this user manager. So we're using dependency injection to go get that user manager so that we can use it inside this class. And once again, we're just going to create that private variable called underscore user manager, private read only. And now for the user manager, we have the add to role async. And the add to role async requires a user and a string of role. So we need to get a user and a role. Now, what I could do then is just make those my two fields. So I'm going to do prop, and we're going to do application user. Bring in the namespace here for the models. And this is going to be our user. And then the other thing that we needed in here, if we look at the IntelliSense, is the role as a string. So let's go ahead and add that as a property here. I'm going to call it new role. Okay. Let's just clean up this class a little bit here. All right. So, all right, that should work, right? We need to get in our view model the user, the entire user, and that string role. Okay, so now we can say RVM user and RVM new role, right? That should be fine. Okay, now that add to role async, we're going to have to come back and revisit that in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and return. Well, what if it's successful? Well, you know what? Let's just do this for right now. We'll address some of that a little bit later. We'll return back to, actually, we'll do a redirect to action. We're just going to redirect to the index action of this controller that we're in. So we're just going to go back to index of our user manager controller. Okay? Does that work for everybody? Works for me. Let's remove and sort while we're at it. Okay. So that would be assuming everything works great. We're going to have to revisit that a little bit later because we're going to want to check the model binding and stuff to make sure it works, and then that we were, in fact, able to add the role. Okay, so if that's the case, if this form is going to need to submit a user and a role, we're going to need to have some inputs on this form that fill that information out. Okay, so we're going to do input, and the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need some of that good old user stuff. User, is that going to work? Not really, because unfortunately, user is a complex object, right? The user on our, oops, if I grab this, well, here, let's do this. Go to definition. Okay, so if we look at this, unfortunately, user is a complex object called application user. An application user has a ton of properties on it, right? It has more than one. And I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like trying to go through and adding every single one of those properties as an input. So maybe there's a better way to do this. Maybe instead of getting the whole user, we only really need to know the user ID. Because then here inside of our AdRoll action here, we just have to go get that user ID, right? So we could do like user manager find by ID async. And we can pass in just the user ID. Okay, so that would be a lot easier. So what if we had RVM user ID instead of the actual whole user in there? Don't you think that would be a little simpler? I think it would. So we'll do var user equals that. We'll pass in user. And now we need to fix this by changing our view model from getting the whole user to just a string that is the user ID. Save that. And what do we have here? Is this going to work? Yeah, that looks pretty good. Why doesn't it like this though? Why doesn't it like this user? Well, it turns out that find by ID async does not return an individual user, an application user. Instead, it returns a task of user. So we actually need to fix this. The way you fix that is by doing await. Okay, and that's, instead of giving you the task of that object, it's going to give you the actual object inside of the task. And of course, we're getting some red squigglies here because what we need to do is make the containing scope, that is this AdRoll action, needs to be async as well. So if we click on that, it's going to give us the async keyword there. And now one other thing that I usually do whenever I have an asynchronous action here is I'm actually going to return not iActionResult, but a task of iActionResult, just like how the find by ID async returns a task. We also want to return from an asynchronous action a task of that object. Okay, and don't worry, MVC will be able to use this task. I need to bring in the system threading tasks using statement though. So don't worry, MVC will be able to use a task of an iActionResult just the same way that it uses a regular iActionResult. It's already built in. Now we have this green underline here. Let's see what it wants. It says we need to insert await. Okay, I'm good with that. And now it looks like our adding of a role to the user looks like everything is fine there. But now we need to kind of walk ourselves back the other direction. So how are we going to get this user ID? And do we need to know the new model, the new role? No, that's actually, the new role is going to be something that the user, specifies from our page, not something that we need to know when we're creating the page, right? So when we're calling this AdRoll page, we don't yet know what the role is that we're going to assign to the user. That's what this view is actually for. So let's at least include the ID, right? Because we're going to need that. We know that we need that as part of this user management AdRoll view model. Now, what about this new role property? How are we going to get that from this AdRoll view? There's a couple of different ways we could do this, but typically, since this is going to be kind of a list of items and we want the user to select one of those items, the way that I would do that would be a select tag. Okay, and there's a couple of different ways we could use a select tag. The first one is probably the most common way. Well, you know what? Let me go with the slightly simpler way to set this up. I'm going to use ASP4, and I'm going to say the property that this select or drop down is setting the value for on our view model is that new role. Okay, so whatever we select from this drop down box, whatever that item is that we select is going to be assigned to this new role property. Okay. Now, how do we get those roles as options? Because a select dropdown needs to know what are the different items that you could select. And that's what these option tags are for. Now, what I could do, or what I really need to do, is get that list of roles that are available into this view model in some way. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to go ahead and create a new prop list, and the list needs to be of some roles, right? So I'm going to use the identity role. I'm going to bring in the namespace here for both the identity role as well as for the list. So system collections generic. And this is going to be the list of roles that are available for the user to select to assign to the user. Okay? So let's go back to our user management controller and let's start adding. Let's add those roles to our view model. So we're going to do a new user management AdRoll view model. And I'm going to take a page out of what I was doing up here and I'm just going to instantiate some values here. So for the roles, oops, for the roles, we need to get a list of something, right? We want a new list of identity role. That's all kind of ugly, isn't it? So new list. Let's bring in some using statements. And same with this one here. Delete this. Now we can do control period to bring that in. Okay. So that's our list of identity roles that we want to add. So how do we get this list of identity roles? How do we get a list of all of the roles that are available for the user to select? Well, it turns out we can use the role manager. So I'm going to go back up here, and we don't currently have it in our controller class yet. So I need to add it to our constructor so we can inject it into our constructor. So I'm going to do role manager, and identity role is the class that we're using for our roles, role manager. And now let's assign it to the underscore role manager variable that I have not yet created. Oops, role manager, there we go. And we're going to use control period to generate the read only field. And now we can use role manager down here. And instead of a new list, I'm going to do role manager roles. All right. Now the roles, oops, is not a function, it's a property. So that's going to be okay. Now iQueryable, you'll notice it cannot implicitly convert type iQueryable to list of identity role. So we do need to do something like this, to list, right? And now let's go ahead and, oops, let's return the view and pass in the view model. But there was something else on this view model. Remember, we have a couple of other properties on here just before we move on to the next stage. And that is, do we need to know the new role? No, because that's what the user is going to select on this page. But we do need to tell them what the user ID is, okay? Because that's really something that's hidden in the background. The user of this AdRoll page is not going to know the user ID. So we're going to need to pass that along to our view and then reuse that user ID and make sure that it gets passed along here when we call the AdRoll action where we're doing the model binding to our resulting view model. So the user ID, though, where are we going to get that? Where do we get the user ID that's been selected from here, right? Our index view and the user back here, we had our list of users. The user clicked on this AdRoll link. We need to pass into this AdRoll action the ID of the user. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do string ID, and we're going to use some tag helpers here to do ASP route ID is equal to the user ID. Okay, so this is now going to add as part of the anchor tag, the hyperlink, it's going to actually include a parameter of ID with the user's ID. And that's going to be nice and good. Now that's going to get posted into this ID parameter here. And then we can assign that ID to the user role property of our view model. And then ultimately, we want to include that here as part of the model binding because we're going to need it once again here for our ID, right? We're going to need this user ID to go find the user that we're adding the role to. So that's the sequence by which we're getting the user information or the user ID down into this AdRoll action here. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue building our form. So I'm going to go to my AdRoll. And now that I have that list of roles, right, because we have our list of roles here being assigned to, and maybe I want to do an order. You know what? I might as well do that too. Order by roles. I want to order by the name of the role. Does that work for everybody else? Works for me. I'm fine with that. Okay. Let's go back to our add roles. Now, okay, I've got that list of roles. So what I can do is, since I want to iterate over each one of the roles that's in that list, I can use the for each loop. So I could say for each role in the model.roles, I'm going to add an option to our select list. That option, the value, is going to be the role, and the text is going to be the role. Oops. Value, you know what, that's not right. It's supposed to be role. I'm not getting any IntelliSense there. I will get it outside of the option tag here so you guys can see this role.name is actually what I want, right? So I want the name. Just a little buggy in this particular version of Visual Studio tooling. Okay, so that's really what we want to do. We want to have an option where the value is the name of the role that's you know, within that role item, and then the name that shows up is going to be the name of that role. Now that's one way, and I think that's probably the simplest way of doing it that kind of makes a lot of sense and it's pretty logical. But there is actually a tag helper on our select tag, and that tag helper is the ASPItems. Now you might be tempted to think, oh well, all I need to do then is just do model.roles, but unfortunately you would be wrong. But we're going to get to that in just a moment. Once I do use the ASPItems like this, I don't need the for each loop, so I can just go ahead and remove that. But you could do this, right, and not use ASPItems, and it would work just fine, okay? But I'm going to show you the alternative here where we do use the ASPItems helper tag, okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to need to get rid of this for each loop. And you can see we've got some red squigglies here. That's because cannot implicitly convert type of list core identity role to, if you look at it, it says IEnumerable select list item. So we got some work to do here. And one of the reasons why I typically don't always use ASPItems is because this can get a little confusing and a little difficult to manage. Essentially, these roles need to be, oops, I didn't mean to go out of that yet. It needs to be an IEnumerable of select list item. So our roles need to actually be a prop, oops, list, or IEnumerable, I should say. IEnumerable of select list item. And that is what it wants for our roles, okay, as the roles property. Now let's bring in the using statement. Now as soon as I do that, now if we take a look, our red squiggly is gone. All right, so that works. So how do we get this IEnumerable of select list item as roles? Because clearly that's not going to work back here, right? When we assign our roles to the roles property, that's not going to work. Well, luckily for us, there is a simple little class that will do this conversion for us. So we just need to do a new select list. Okay, now I'm going to bring in the namespace here, which is MVC rendering. And that select list takes a constructor of, and if I just go up one here, IEnumerable items. So anything that is an enumeration of items will work here. So I can just go ahead and do this. And that'll work. Now I'm going to take off the toList here. And the main reason is because toList actually creates a collection, and SelectList is a collection. So we'd essentially be getting the values, creating a collection, and then from that making another collection. And that's just kind of doubling up on what we, on making that collection. There's really no need to do that. It's just a waste of memory and CPU to do all that. So I'm just going to do it the one time. I'm just going to pass in my orders by into my select list. And now that satisfies everybody. Everybody's happy with this. Okay. Now, what I typically do is on my view model, I can actually change this from a IEnumerable of select list items to just a select list. That's all it needs to be, is just a select list, and that's perfectly fine. It's a smaller syntax slightly. It's just a little easier for me to follow along with, because having that before with the IEnumerable of select list item can look a little confusing when you're going here and you're assigning a select list, right? Because it looks like it says select list IEnumerable items, and that's not really the return that you expect, or you shouldn't be expecting to assign a select list to an IEnumerable select list items. That just, for me, there's a bit of a dissonance there. So I prefer just saying, well, this is actually a select list. And it's really the same thing, right? It's just that where are you doing the conversion? Are you doing the conversion here to your view model, or are you doing it from your view model to your view? Oops, it's this one here, to your view. And it just looks better to me like this, okay? I'm not as confused about it this way. But I guess it's really kind of a personal preference thing. Really your choice. Okay, so I've got my drop down of roles. Let's go ahead and remove that. I don't need that anymore. I can also remove and sort. Save that so we clean up our class a little bit here. Okay, so I've got my ID and I've got my new role, right? Now, about that ID, something some of you may have caught. Do I really want this to be an input for the user ID? Yes, I want to return a value. I want to make sure that this value for the user ID gets passed along as part of the form submission, but I don't want the user to be able to change it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the type of this input is actually equal to hidden. And that way it will fill in the user ID input with whatever comes through as part of the view model, but it is not an editable input field that's going to be passed along as part of the form submission. So that's what I'm going to do for that. I'm going to change that to hidden. So now I've got an ID and I've got a new role that's going to be passed along from a select list. Next thing I need is going to be some sort of button. So we're going to say input type, submit button, and I need to add a value here. So value is, let's go ahead and call it AdRoll. Let's save that. Now, this probably isn't enough information for the user to really make a wise decision, because who's the user? If the user comes to this page, let's say that they're on the index page, they click on the AdRoll link, and then they have to get up from their chair for a half hour or whatnot, and they come back, and all they see is just a drop-down box and a button. Maybe we should tell the user who it is that they're adding the role for, just to make sure that they know that they're in the right spot. So I'm going to add an H3 tag here. And I'm going to say add role for, who am I adding a role for? This would be the model dot, how can I, what's unique about a user? What's going to help me as a user of this page figure out who it is I'm adding a role for? I'd say email, maybe. That's probably a good one, but I don't currently have it on the view model. So let's go back to our view model. And let's add the email as a string. Okay, that's a small change. That's going to help us out here. Now we just need to go to our controller and let's add that email here. Email is equal to, well, it looks like I need to go get the email of that user, don't I? So I'm just going to do this. Copy and paste. And anytime that you do a copy and paste, you should probably be thinking, couldn't I make that some sort of helper method? So like a private, this is going to return back an application user, get user. by ID. How about that? Now we could just pass that in and return. Now it doesn't like that because we need to make it asynchronous. Async task of application user. And by ID, I need to pass in a string of ID. We'll just do ID. All right, so it's just a little helper method. And I'm even going to make this a little more unique by making it a expression bodied member to make you guys really razzle dazzled. This is a fairly new thing that you can do in C#. Oops, that's not where I wanted to put the break. There, that's where I want to do it. Okay, so this is essentially a getUserById method that takes an ID, and using that ID is going to return the value from this findById async on our user manager. And now I can just do this. I can just say var user equals we want to await get user by ID, pass in the ID, and then the same thing up here. Now it doesn't like this yet because I need to also make its scope asynchronous. And once again, task by action result. Now we can use that user object and get the email. And we can pass that along. So now we can include that in our AdRoll. So AdRoll for email. All right. I think that makes everybody happy there. So let's just kind of go back over this and recap everything that we've done here and just see what might have fallen through. If there is anything, maybe nothing's fallen through. So here I'm going to change this to HTTP GET because that's the index action. It's going to be GET. Our AdRoll is initially going to be a GET, and then our AdRoll is going to be POST. It's going to be the data that we want to return back. Wasn't there some stuff that we needed to do here? That seems to have fallen through the cracks. Don't we want to check to see that the values that are passed into this are good before we try to go and, add that role to the user? So let's do some validation here. I'm going to do if model state is valid. Then let's go ahead and proceed with all of this good stuff. And not only that, this adding to the user role, maybe we should check that too, because that's actually going to return a result as well. It's called an identity result. So let's assign that a variable. And then let's check that variable. So if result, we can see succeeded. All right, so that's good. If it succeeded, then we're good to go ahead and return that redirect to index. But if it didn't, then we probably want to add to the model state some error information. So we'll do model state, add model error. What's the key? I'm just going to leave that blank for now. But the error message is going to be, if this result did not succeed, then we're going to say result dot errors. The errors that we have here are an IEnumerable of identity result errors. Let's see what the properties are on these errors. So we'll do a first or default just so that we can see what the properties on each error are. We have a code, and we have a description. Well, actually, so what we can do then is we could use the code and the description to make up our model errors. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say for each result errors, or say for each error in our result errors, we're going to model state add error, and the value is going to be, the first one is the key, error is going to be the code, and then the error message is going to be the error description. So that fits in there fairly nicely. Now we're just going to return the view, right? This is going to be returning the AdRoll view along with the view model, and that's also going to give, since we added all of the model errors, okay, actually we need to do RVM. Since we have all of the model errors, RVW, boy, I just can't type today. I'm going to add all the model errors to our model state, and that will show up then in our view, and we can use that information to explain to the user what went wrong. So if it succeeded, we're going to go just right back to the index action, but if it didn't, get all of the errors and then return back to the view. Now, what if the model state was not valid? Well, we'll just once again return view. And in fact, I probably don't even need to have this one in here, because if it does the for each and adding model state, it's eventually going to fall through and run this line anyway if I don't have this return statement. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Now, there is one small little snag here that we need to consider, and that is, what about what we did here where we added roles to this whole thing? Because ID is fine to be assigned to ID, but if we look at the AdRoll, the only two inputs that we're actually passing along are the user ID and the new role, not the actual list of roles. So if there is a falling through where we need to redisplay the view, we need to go grab this list of roles once again. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to copy this. Uh-oh, here I am copying and pasting again. Maybe I should extract that out into its own action, or its own function. Maybe that's what I should do. So let's do that. Private select list, say get roles, or say get all roles. Why not? Make it a little more explicit. And all this is going to do is generate a new select list from our role manager and order them for us by name. So we can get all roles now. Just call that instead of what we're doing right here. And then the same thing for what we need to do here, where if we do fall through and we need to redisplay the AdRoll view, we can just do RVM roles, get all roles. Okay. It's a good thing we took a step back and just verified that we were doing everything we wanted to and we didn't have anything fall through. Now, I do know that there is one other thing that we have not yet addressed, and we will here in just a moment, but let's just see what this looks like when we try to run it. Let's remove and sort, just because I like to do that. Let's go to debug, start without debugging. Okay, so let's once again head over to the user management. All right, that is still something we need to address, and we will in just a moment. But let's see what we got for AdRoll. Oh, look at that. Welcome to Contoso. AdRoll for Steve at contoso.com. Good. Okay, that looks good. Our drop-down, admin, employee, member. That's ordered by alphabetically, right? Let's select admin and add a role for Steve. Okay, again, still that's not really good. But let's check out and see what happened. We got returned back. Everything seemed to work pretty good here, right? Because we got returned right back to the index view, which is what should have happened if everything worked out the way it was supposed to when we added the role, right? If we added the role good, then we were supposed to return redirect back to this index action. So if that's the case, let's take a look here at our ASP.NET user roles. And look at that. We have a user ID and a role ID. So we have a link table that links our user ID to our role. And this is the record that's been created because we made that link. I could add another role. Let's go to employee, add role. Okay, that seems to have worked. Let's take a look and refresh this. Well, look at that. Now I have my user account has both roles associated with it. Now what if I try to add the same role that I already have? What if I try to re-add the admin role? Looks like we lost some information here. Add role for, and we got redirected, which is kind of what we expected, but we lost our email address, so maybe that's something we need to fix. But why did we get redirected? We don't even know why we got redirected. Well, we do sort of know, but the user themselves doesn't really know, right? We need to indicate that somehow. So what we should probably go ahead and do is add, as part of our AdRoll view, some form of telling them that there's been a problem. We're going to use the div tag ASP validation summary, and that's going to give us the details of what went wrong. Okay, so we're going to do ASP validation summary all, save that, and now if I try to add role, user already in role admin. So that's a good way for us to get it, right? Employee add role, user already in role employee, but we still are missing the email thing. So let's go fix that. I'm going to go back to my user management controller, and I think it's just a simple matter of what we were doing up here. We were getting the user email. Well, we haven't really done that down here. So let's go ahead and do that now. RVM, we need to get the user. Let's bring this out of there, and let's put it right there. There we go. Okay. That way, if the model state is not valid, we still get the email and the roles. If it is valid, but we end up having some sort of problem adding to there, it's still going to hit these two items here and add it to the view model and then return that. So that is probably what we really want to do. Let's try that again. So admin, add role. And there we go. Now we have add role for Steve at Contoso. And of course it failed because I already have it. Employee, member, that should work successfully. Okay, but let's finally address this thing here. The roles that we have are not displaying properly. What can we do about that? Well, the problem is that right now, if we go to, let's just stop what we're doing here. I'm going to exit out. It's this view here that's having the problem when we try to look at the roles. Okay, now in our roles, we could try to get every single one of them, right? We could try to get every one of them and display them as some sort of string, right? So I might be doing something like this. String, join, and what am I joining? Well, I want a separator of comma separated values, and we're going to pass in as an enumerable the user roles. Okay, let's save that. Now let's see what happens. So debug, start with that debugging. Okay, so that at least got rid of the big long string, but why is it not showing any roles? Well, let's do this. I'm going to need to debug, so I'm going to close that, and we will add a debug spot here right there on our roles where we're trying to show the roles. And let's inspect what we have for our user and what the roles are that it shows. So let's do IIS Express so we actually hit debug mode. Okay, so now we get to our debug spot. Let's take a look at user. See that user role count is 0. What about the user information? Can I get that? User. Okay, so it all looks good, but why is the roles empty when we know that there's at least 3 roles? Well, I'm going to show you a little problem. It's not actually the solution, but I want to show you something here because not everybody knows this. It's a little hidden detail about Entity Framework that's different from the old Entity Framework to Entity Framework Core. And that is, if I go back up here and I'm getting my user information in my action. So we're going to go to the index action. We're getting all of our users and we're ordering by. There used to be a function on any collection in Entity Framework where if it was a navigation property on an object, it would do something called lazy loading. That is, if you asked for the values of that property, it would go and query the database for you at the moment that you needed it. So here, if I look at my users, let's go to the definition here of users. And I'm going to have to drill a few times. So I'm going to go to TUser, go to definition, identity user. That's where we're actually going here. On identity user, okay, which is the base, it's the root class of our users, our application users, we'll find that we have a collection of T-user role, and it's called roles. Now, Entity Framework would see this in prior editions and do something by default called lazy loading, which again means that once we asked for some values of those roles, it would go and query the database and get the values of those roles for us. But in Entity Framework Core, we no longer have lazy loading. Instead, we need to do something called eager loading. And the way you do eager loading is to simply include a function on here called include. Okay, now that is not on in currently because we need to bring in a using statement. So I'm going to bring in the using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And now you'll see that it's satisfied with this, and all include needs is, let me see if I can get some better IntelliSense here. So we need either the string navigation property pass, so I could pass in a string, but most people prefer doing the second option, which is to pass in an expression of func, or just a lambda expression, basically, like what we did over here for order by. So we're going to say we're going to get the user roles property. So eager load, get for me all of the roles on that user. Okay, now that unfortunately is not going to solve our problem. And if we run this again, I will get rid of our, so the debug is gone. So let's go ahead and run without debugging. Okay, so we have something in here again, but notice that it's identity role 1, string, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Role 1, string, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Framework User ID Role on System String. So we've got 3 lists of basically the same thing. And the real problem is that it's not actually giving us the role names, right? We're trying to join on roles, but the roles are not actually the names. The roles that it's returning is the data from this ASP.NET user roles table. Okay, and that's not going to work. We need to, I guess I probably should put, to demonstrate this, I'm going to one more time because I don't want to confuse anybody here. I'm going to run this in debug mode again so you guys can actually see what these roles are that are showing up for this user now. And we're going to hit this, and now if we take a look at the user, we're going to see on roles that we have 3 now, but we have 3 different objects that are the role ID and the user ID. And that does not really get us much closer to where we wanted to go. But it does at least illustrate to you guys that one problem with Entity Framework you guys need to know about. And that is, if you're going to include some values from a navigation property, you're going to need to call this include method to go get those values. So to solve this problem, I need to get a good copy, a good list of the roles, right? I need to actually get the roles by name. And it turns out that there is a function to do this on the user manager class. And if I just show you here, I'm just going to grab a spot here randomly, say user manager get roles async, and it takes a user, but we can see it takes an application user, but it returns a list of strings. And that list of strings is the actual roles by name. So we need to pass it an instance of the username. But since I'm doing my for each loop here, I need to actually do that request for all the roles that belong to a user right here inside of my for each loop that exists inside of my view. So I'm going to use dependency injection inside my view. Yes, that's right, dependency injection in your view. I'm going to use the inject declaration, and I'm going to pass in user manager application user. Now I did give it a name, so it's going to be user manager. And I need to bring in a using statement so that this works. And our user manager actually comes from the Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity namespace, which I've got right here. So I'll just copy that and go right up here to the top of our view. And we're going to say at using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, and voila, it likes that. It says, okay, I'm cool with that. Now, down here, for each one of my users in my model users, all I need to do is ask for that same thing. User manager get roles async. Pass in the user. Okay, and I can get rid of this little doohickey there. Now, it's not going to like this just yet because get roles async actually returns a task of iList string. So I need to once again use the await operator. And now that should return an actual list to my join function. Let's take a look and see what happens now. So I'm going to go debug, start without debugging. Look at that. Email, the roles, and I can add a role. So there you guys go. I've covered a lot of territory in this video. We've covered a lot of old ground and some new ground in this. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe to the channel. And give me that thumbs up. You know, it's always like seeing that thumbs up. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Bye-bye. If you would be interested in early access to our videos, live monthly Q&As, your name in the credits, or one-on-one sessions, please visit us on Patreon at patreon.com/programmingmadeeasy.